Hey guys, welcome back to Chapter 1, the official first chapter of our series of learning C++ for Windows using Visual Studio. Oh, it's a mouthful. Hope I don't have to do that every time. Anyway, so, with all the other meta stuff out of the way, like installing your IDE, in other words Visual Studio 2019, we can start jumping right into building our first application. So, in today's video, we are going to cover how to create a new project. We're going to talk about creating source files, where you're going to put all your source code, or the code that you write. We're going to talk about how a program is structured, its skeleton, so to speak. It's not quite as spooky as it sounds. It's mostly just boring syntactic data, but if you don't follow these standards, then your code just doesn't run, it doesn't work. So it's pretty important to learn. And finally, by the end of this video, we are going to create our first basic C++ application titled Hello World. We're going to be using the console for this application, so before we start, I should introduce what the console actually is. The console is essentially the first interface used by most modern computers, and I say modern loosely, as it could have been from like the 1960s, 1970s onwards. It's the black and white screen that you'll see in your hacking scenes in your movies. So as an example, you can just type in CMD on Windows and you get this screen right here. So yeah, it shows me Microsoft Windows, all that. It shows me the current path that it's in right now. And depending on what commands I put in here, I can make it display all kinds of data. I can make it do cool tricks. Whatever. Like for instance, I could type in color 0A and bam, turns green. Now I'm even more of a hacker, okay? But just as a note, the console is this interface that we see right here. It may look scary, it may look complex, but honestly, it's probably as simple as you can get in the world of computers, since all it really is just text. You just type things in, you might get some words back. And why are we going to be using the console in this case? Well, there are two parts to this answer, I guess. The first one is that it's going to be much easier to program a console application because you don't have to worry about creating all your fancy interfaces and pretty graphics and all that. I know a lot of people, myself included, were not the most artistically inclined, so I'm not really that great at making visuals, and as such it's just going to be a lot easier to make a console application instead. The second part of this answer is a little bit more complicated. It's that, at least on Windows, creating a GUI, a graphical user interface, or your fancy interfaces with the pretty colors and buttons and all that, it's not exactly well optimized in a sense. I mean, sure, we can create a little window that says Hello World in it or something, but that uses a lot more processing power in your computer than a simple console application. We're going to be learning more about that later on, like in much more advanced parts of our tutorial series, but for now, just know, making console applications is a lot easier. So, let's get into it. Minimize this for now. First off, we have to create a new project in Visual Studio. A project is basically just a little compendium of where all your files for a certain application are going to go. So, as you've probably guessed, we're going to click on Create a New Project. And what do we have here? We have all sorts of different project types. Now, you're going to have less than I do because you probably just installed the C++ libraries, or the C++ environment at least. And that's fine. I mean, I have my F# stuff here. I don't even see my C# and VB and stuff. Blank solution, sure, we'll call it that. But essentially all we're going to be doing for today is an empty project for C++ Windows console. Simple as that. So we're just going to select that, double click or select and hit next. What's our project name going to be called? Well, you can call it whatever you want. For the sake of organization, I'm going to call this one Hello World. Solution name? Solutions are a Visual Studio proprietary thing. You don't need to worry too much about it for now. When you do more advanced projects, it might be a problem. But for now, yeah, solution name can be the same as the project name. The location, you specify this. This is just wherever all your files are going to get saved. And hit create. And give it a second. It's going to do all its cool generation for the solution files. And finally, we'll get greeted with this screen, which looks like a lot of complicated things, but honestly, it really isn't. So, this area on the side over here, right on the right, is called our Solution Explorer. Now, we mentioned that solutions were like this proprietary Microsoft Visual Studio thing. It is to some degree. All it really does is organizes all your files, and it knows where to look for files, and it knows how to link files up later on. In our case, we're only going to be using one file within this solution. Now, when we created an empty project, it didn't create any files for us. So what we want to do, we're going to go down to source files over here. It should be the bottom folder. And it's an empty folder, but just right click it, go to add, and new item. Easy as that. Create a C++ file, and you can call it whatever you want. Source.cpp works, main.cpp works. Anything as long as you know that that will be your primary source file. So I'm happy with source.cpp. You can just add it as is. And now we have a cool text editor where you can type in whatever you want. Alright, so getting into this. What have we covered so far? We have created our first project. That's good. We have created a source file. Good stuff. Third thing on the list, the program skeleton. So the structure of the program. Now, let's say our program is going to be outputting the words hello world to a console. So you might think, oh, that's easy. Let's just type in hello world. And you know what? Let's save it. And this thing starts flashing. And you'll see it's like a little spell checker thing says something's wrong. And sure enough, if you try and run this at all, why isn't it letting me do that? Sure, local Windows debugger. You'll see some stuff down here, and bam, you get errors. You can't do anything. That's because programming has its own syntax to it, of course. So, to actually write a program, we need to wrap it up in a certain way that the computer is going to start understanding. So, for a basic C++ application, you will have all your code going into one little block. And that block is called main by default. This is how you declare that block. So you'll have a little main, two parentheses, opening and closing, and then a little curly brace to open up the actual block. And then maybe a new line or something. And then finally your closing curly brace at the very end. You could just leave it like that, no code inside, but that's no fun. Doesn't do anything. So, inside our main function, we're also going to need to specify a return code. This is more important on Linux applications, or at least you'll see it more often in Linux applications, but we'll end up seeing it a bit more later as well. The 0 code as a return code means that the program ran successfully. So as long as we keep that in here, then whatever we're running the program from, say Windows, it will know that the program ran successfully if it reaches this line. If it doesn't reach this line, there might be an issue. Now, we're forgetting a few more things here, though. If we run this on its own, well, we also won't get very much. I mean, we can run it, for example, get more errors. And the error that we get is that it's missing a type specifier on line 3. So where's line 3? Line 3 is right where we have main. So the type specifier means there's a certain data type that this little block of code has to return. Well, we're returning a 0 over here, so 0 should naturally be an integer. So we can say that the main function is going to return an integer, and you'll see the int thing, it gets highlighted up in blue. That's another cool feature of Visual Studio. It color codes certain things so you have a better idea of how things work. We're going to learn a bit more about data types another time, but for now just know that main returns an integer, and that integer should be 0 if it all goes well. So if we run this as is, what do we get? We get absolutely nothing. It just runs and then it exits with code 0. And that's it. Now we want this to actually do something. In our case, X, or it'll be printing some characters to a screen. So we're going to include our library. So hash include IOStream within those little arrows. The IOStream library, we're not going to get too much into it, but just know that we need to do it for most things that might be semi-useful in C++. For the sake of simplicity, we're also going to include using namespace std semicolon. And finally, to actually get this to return something, I'm going to type in cout, or cout, console out. It doesn't really matter how you want to say it. 2 little arrows, in quotes, hello world. 2 more arrows, end L, semicolon. You can save that, you'll see everything goes green on the side, everything is saved. Now what exactly does this do? Do not worry about these arrows too much. Do not worry about console out too much. Do not worry about this line at all. That's a little bit more advanced, it's just keeping things a little bit simpler for us. What cout does, it outputs something to the console. Now, what does output? It outputs hello world to the console. And then this thing at the end, this is called a constant. We're going to be talking a bit more about that later as well. It's part of the IOStream library, and it's basically just like hitting enter in a text editor. It just creates a new line. Okay? That's all you really need to know. So save that. Local Windows debugger, or whatever run button you have up here. Sure enough, hello world, new line, and that's it. Press any key to close this window. And that's it for today. Guess get ready for the next chapter, chapter 2. We're going to be talking a bit more about different data types. We're going to talk a bit about variables. We might even briefly introduce constants. And all these things are all going to play a much bigger part in the grander scheme of things when we start doing all kinds of computations. Don't worry, it's not going to be too math heavy, so look forward to it. Peace.